Well, welcome to the next session. This is session 6D. The title of this session is an AI governance framework and methodology to mitigate corporate risk. Interesting title. And we have, to discuss this, we have Navrina Singh and Zaidi, sorry, and the two of them are going to take it away, and I'll actually allow them to go ahead and introduce themselves to you. The actual topic itself, I think, is everyone's going to find fascinating because these are really hot topics for any organization right now. It's how to do governance around AI. So let me hand it over right away then to you, Jay.
Thank you very much, Derek. Let me share my screen real quick. So as Derek mentioned, most organizations are testing or evaluating or implementing AI. And I think what's very important to keep in mind is that AI creates, the implementation of AI creates challenges in the real world. So what we're going to talk about today is a framework and methodology for AI governance and how to be responsible with AI. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm the managing partner of AlyData. We specialize in CDO advisory, data and AI governance and insights. We've been in business since 2014 and done a lot of work in this space. So I'm looking forward to sharing my thoughts and our learnings with the audience today. Navrina?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jay. So nice to meet all of you. And I really want to thank Jay for inviting me to this session. I'm Navrina Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of Credo AI. We are a brand new startup founded in 2020, backed by top tier investors, including Andrew Ng, who I think some of you might know as an AI pioneer. I currently also sit on the board of Mozilla, guiding their trustworthy AI initiatives, and have spent over 20 years in product development and engineering at companies like Qualcomm and Microsoft. Really excited to be here, sharing not only the great work that AlyData is doing in governance frameworks, but how you can actually operationalize it using a set of tools and methodologies within your organization. And we'll give you a sneak peek into what we are building at Credo AI, but happy to follow up after the session around the needs around your organizations.
Thank you, Navrina. So with that, let me jump into the agenda for today. We are going to cover a lot of different areas, and so we may go a little bit fast. But the idea was to be comprehensive in this presentation and make sure that we are providing the audience with a pretty good understanding of what AI governance and responsible AI is all about. Talking about some frameworks that we've developed and a methodology, engagement model, and a phased maturity journey, followed by what it takes to operationalize AI governance, which is a critical aspect of AI for every organization. So the definition that we have come up with, there are several definitions in the industry. What we look at responsible AI is an end-to-end lifecycle governance management to ensure trustworthy, fair, compliant, and auditable development and use of AI. So again, the keywords there are trustworthy, fair, compliant, and auditable. Very, very important aspects of any organization that is implementing AI or is considering implementing AI. So here are the 4 key takeaways that we are going to leave you with at the end of the presentation today. The first one is every organization is evaluating or implementing AI, but it presents some serious ethical, legal, governance, risk, and compliance-related challenges which must be addressed. The second key takeaway, to operationalize AI, organizations need standards, they need the ability to audit, they need expertise, they need tools for AI governance, and they need alignment of incentives across the stakeholders. Takeaway number 3, typically we recommend doing a current state assessment of AI governance maturity as a starting point for organizations, followed by gap analysis to achieve the desired target state, and then a strategy and roadmap to get there. And then finally, operationalizing AI governance is a journey which includes implementation of AI governance frameworks, a repeatable methodology, coupled with processes, tools, skilled associates, and robust governance capabilities. Again, lots of areas to focus on. What we're going to try to get to you today in about the next 20, 25 minutes is this comprehensive view of AI governance so that you can be successful in your journey.
You know, it's interesting. We, in the past year and a half at Credo, have spent a lot of time with Global 2000 organizations, as well as AI native organizations. And I'm sure, like all of you here coming from the data organizations, are really thinking about what are these underlying risks that we should be thinking about beyond the data. And as you can imagine, machine learning systems are the systems that are sort of reasoning over this massive amount of data that you and your organizations are managing. So, you know, as we sort of looked across the global 2000s that we are working in, whether they come from finance and banking, whether they come from insurance, whether they come from government or high tech, what became very clear was there were a plethora of risks that starts to get injected in the entire life cycle. Something which has become really prominent in the past year and a half, and that a lot of companies are focusing on, is demographic bias. But that's not it. Like, if you think about explainability challenges, how do you ensure provenance, not only of, where your data came from and the lineage of the data, but also how these decisions around implementing these machine learning solutions end to end are being made, could certainly introduce a lot of risks. And as we speak to leaders across these industry sectors, what's really top of mind is, how does this risk manifest into different aspects that they are managing? And some of the core areas that I'm sure all of you are very well aware of is whether this could attribute to potential brand risk, as in case of what's happening in the facial recognition domain. If your systems are not able to identify, diverse demographics, there's a challenge with that. Or it could be because within the industries that you're operating, there are regulatory guardrails that you need to be paying attention to. As an example, we see in finance and banking, existing practices around model risk management, SR 11.7, obviously put some guardrails around how you should be thinking about models that extend beyond statistical models to machine learning models. However, one of the risks that we are not talking about in the slide that we see a lot among our customers is essentially, could you potentially lose business because you've not been able to build that trust layer with your end customers? And what we are finding is good governance is becoming the bedrock of actually enabling that customer trust so that you can unlock more sales opportunities, that you can acquire new customers, that you can retain more additional customers. So Jay, if you can move on to the next slide, again, there is obviously a much more broader list than what we are seeing, but I just wanted to highlight across the 100+ customers that we've been talking to, working with in the past 2 years at Credo AI, what we are finding really becoming some of the barriers to impact of AI is primarily good governance of AI. And some of the factors that are attributing to not having the right governance frameworks, and I'm sure many of you will identify with it, is, what are the standards and policies that we need to be aligning to? Yes, there are emerging conversations and discussions, plus there are existing guidelines provided either by ECOA or FTC, or the new regulations coming out of European Commission called the Artificial Intelligence Act. There is a lot brewing in this space. But how do you define, as an example, fairness for financial systems? How do you create the right standards that you'll be ensuring that your risk scoring models or your portfolio optimizer models can basically be vetted against? So there's a massive gap in lack of gold standards as well as policies that is really preventing organizations from doing good governance, thus preventing the ROI on AI. What we found, secondly, was very fascinating was, again, compliance is just a component of good governance. but it is, we need to be thinking more holistically about the behaviors and decisions in the moments that matter. And are there any tools and capabilities that can enable, multi-stakeholders, whether you are coming from your oversight functions in compliance and audit, all the way to data science as well as machine learning, to able to not only align to those gold standards, but be able to audit for what does compliant AI really look like. And right now, unfortunately, there is no good tools out there, and that's why Credo AI was created. But the idea was really, how do you inform these multi-stakeholder around what does good look like? And then the next thing, which I obviously don't see as a surprise, I see this a lot in organizations, is, generally there is two categories. One is the technical stakeholders coming from data science and machine learning backgrounds, and then the oversight functions coming from legal, policy, compliance. And because of the difference in the AI expertise between these two stakeholders, what is getting created is an AI governance chasm. And to basically bridge the gap between these two stakeholders and ensure that there's an understanding of how are you defining machine learning, how are you defining AI, how are you ensuring the right policies are brought in, how are you going to audit for it, all those get contributed and especially are further intensified because of this large AI expertise gap. Then the next thing that we are finding is really around this whole notion of continuous governance. If you think about the traditional models in whether they're statistical or others, yes, you could do a point in time compliance check. Unfortunately, machine learning systems are live systems. The minute you deploy them in production, they are looking at the production environment and could be undergoing different drifts, whether it's related to data or concept or other factors. And how do you ensure that continuous oversight and accountability is brought to these systems is really critical. And right now, unfortunately, organizations don't have the right accountability structures, the right tools, and the right distribution of responsibilities to ensure this continuous governance. And then lastly, which I find super fascinating, because AI governance, which Jay will be talking about in just a bit, it is not just about tools. It is not just about framework. It is really a change management that enables organizations to move forward, to bring technologies to forefront that can enable more customer trust. And what we are seeing is right now, there is a misalignment of incentives, at least within the organizations that Credo is working in. And this misalignment is you have a set of technical stakeholders, coming from machine learning, AI, and data science and other groups who are incentivized to put out really good, highly accurate, very precise models out in the market very quickly to accomplish the business outcomes. But on the other side, you have the oversight professionals coming from compliance, from data privacy, from policy, to ensure that that is done in a methodical way and under the right guardrails. Unfortunately, there needs to be a sort of a coming together of what these good incentives look like. And that's why I'm very, very excited in the coming slides to talk about what are some of the models you can be adopting, which Jay will be talking about, and I'll be talking about what we've built in terms of products to overcome some of these barriers.
Thank you, Navrina. So with that, great segue. Managing risk at the enterprise level is basically what we are most interested in, because there are two components that we look at when we work with our clients. How do we generate or maximize business value from these investments in data and analytics, and how do we minimize risk? So from a risk perspective, this is your standard 3 lines of defense model. And what we've done here is we've basically put this in the context of an enterprise, starting with the board of directors, which are ultimately responsible and have a fiduciary right to make sure that the organization and the enterprise is being managed well. You go down to your executive team, your CXOs and your business strategy, corporate risk committee, et cetera. And then you have your first line of defense, which are your business segments. These are your individual lines of business. You have, your business stewards, your technical stewards, your data custodians, et cetera. So what we're talking about here is enabling, from an AI perspective, enabling all of these 3 lines of defense to be successful in what they want to do, right? Your first line are the folks that are on the ground actually doing the day-to-day activities. They really have to understand what needs to be done. They have to take accountability for making sure that they are managing and governing data properly according to the regulations and the policies that have been set out by the enterprise. And you have your second line of defense that are primarily responsible for monitoring, for providing the policies and the guidance and overseeing the implementation of these policies across the enterprise. And then finally, you have internal audit and your external auditors, which are your third line of defense, whose job is to independently validate and ensure that the right activities are being performed, that the right level of governance is in place, that there is limited or low risk exposure to the enterprise. So that is what we're after. So as you can see here in the diagram on the left-hand side at the middle tier, data and AI governance play a critical role in the second and first line of defense. So we want to make sure that we are creating a robust capability there for the enterprise. So in terms of the framework, we have developed this framework to be pretty comprehensive. And as you can see in the center, our goal with AI or data and analytics is to create outsized business outcomes for the enterprise and to be responsible while we are doing that. We do not want to deploy AI. We don't want to deploy analytics that are going to cause serious risk to the organization. So we want to balance the creation of the business outcomes with being responsible with AI. So as part of this framework, what you see is in the sort of the middle layer in blue are your basic components. You need a robust strategy. You need AI design and development processes and capabilities. You need robust model testing capabilities. You need to be able to manage those models, and do the version controlling, the CI/CD processes, et cetera, for the operations part. You also want a continuous improvement process to be in place. As Navrina said, I mean, this has to be a continuum. It is not a one-time activity where you deploy the models and you're done. You really have to go and analyze, constantly monitor, analyze, and then improve those models and to make sure that you're not introducing any risks. And then finally, you need the right level of metrics to go with your models that you can monitor and manage. So those are the core components of the framework. And then on the outer layer, what you see is your project management, your AI governance, your platform support, and change management. Very critical aspects of the overall deployment of AI within the enterprise. So the framework is pretty comprehensive, captures all of the key components within, that need to be deployed, as well as the supporting activities, right? Robust project management, robust AI governance, platform support, and change management. So the other question we get asked is, once we've implemented the framework and we've got those things in place, what does this AI governance methodology, or what does this journey look like? And again, every organization is unique. Every organization is different. So, how this methodology is rolled out is going to be very specific to that organization. But at a very high level, what we see are 5 different steps that typically happen. Start off with aligning or getting alignment across your stakeholders from business operations, data, IT, et cetera, on the value of governance and what it takes to govern AI. The second step there is, definition of roles and responsibilities, clarification of roles and responsibilities, and getting buy-in, across that, et cetera, so that everybody's clear in terms of who's going to do what and who's going to be accountable for which sections or which portions of this, during this journey. The third step typically is around creating some sort of a center of excellence for AI. Again, when organizations are deploying AI and they're trying to scale AI across the enterprise, you really need a center of excellence to guide that process. And as part of that center of excellence for AI, you also need to make sure that there are AI governance practices, processes, procedures, and tools that are deployed to to your associates within the various lines of business to make sure that things are being done correctly. And then the fourth step is deployment of standards. As Navrina mentioned, you really need to define standards and policies related to AI governance so that you're standardizing things across the enterprise and you can scale your AI capabilities across the board and do it in a standardized manner without getting into trouble, from a regulatory compliance or ethics, et cetera. And then finally, there's engagement. Very, very important to build an AI governance community to start sharing information across the community, to look at best practices, to introduce training to the end users, et cetera, and then drive the change journey within your enterprise. So these are at a very high level of the 5 steps that we've incorporated in our methodology that we recommend organizations to follow. And the other question we get is, how does this AI modeling process that you see at the bottom align with the data and AI governance processes that have to be introduced? So what we've attempted to do here is basically highlight some of the key steps within the AI modeling journey, which is understanding the business, evaluating the data that's needed for your models, preparing the data and modeling the data, evaluating the model, and then finally deploying it, right? So that's your, at a very high level, the AI modeling process. And that's where your technical associates get involved, your data engineers, your data scientists, your machine learning engineers, et cetera. Now, what we need to do is keep in mind that all of these activities need to be governed and need to be managed for us to be responsible in terms of how you're doing things. So what we've shown on the upper layer there is basically the overlaying the modeling process with the data and AI governance processes, right? So you start off with evaluation of purpose. Again, this is something that is done in a cross sort of domain, right? So what we need here from a governance perspective is members from business, from legal, from compliance, from ethics, et cetera, across the organization to participate in this governance process. Because again, this, as Navrina mentioned earlier, what you want to do is make sure that the associates that are building the models and deploying them are also aware of all of the ramifications, the regulatory compliance issues, the privacy related issues, the governance related activities that need to be in place. So that oversight is handled by folks from the various organizations within your enterprise. So we start off with purpose evaluation. This is where a cross-functional team needs to come together, work with the technology folks to clearly lay out what is the purpose of this model or the AI initiative that's being initiated. That is then followed by evaluation of the data and data use case evaluations, right? Again, done in a cross-functional manner. The next step is scoring the risk, right? What are the risks that are going to be that are going to be introduced by the construction of this new model that you're going to be building, right? You want to be able to score the risk. You need to be able to make sure that you are able to mitigate the risk based on the risk scores as you're building the model and as you're going to deploy it. And finally, you also want to make sure that you do an impact assessment of that particular model before it goes live. So those are the activities in blue that you see on the top. And then finally, as you get ready for launch, you want to do a soft launch. You want to make sure that all of the key stakeholders are at the table when you're doing the soft launch. They have evaluated all of the risks, that they understand what you're going to be deploying, who is going to be impacting, et cetera. And then finally, you deploy it into production. So again, very important for organizations to make sure that these things are happening in parallel. There's a lot of coordination that's needed. There's a lot of collaboration that's needed to make sure that this is done in a responsible manner. So we've developed a AI governance engagement model. Again, I don't intend on going into this in detail, but the idea here is you have different teams that are going to come to the table. You have the business and product teams, you have the business data stewards that are going to be there, and then you have technology organizations. Each one is going to play a very important role in this AI governance journey. So we want to make sure that this particular model is clearly defined up front, that all of the accountability is laid out, and that people are operating in a collaborative manner. And then again, this, the AI governance and deploying AI is a journey. It's a maturity journey. You start at, in most cases at a very low level of maturity, and then you kind of grow into that as your capabilities increase, as you implement more and more of the repeatable processes, standards, policies, metrics, et cetera. So what we have here is basically a 3-phased maturity journey that we typically recommend to our clients. We start out by designing the operating model, right? This is where you do a high-level capability assessment, you develop your model framework, and you come up with a rollout plan for the overall AI and AI governance activities that need to be done. Once you've done with that phase, you go into an initial rollout and stakeholder buy-in phase. This is where you are rolling out, you're taking a very, very narrowly scoped proof of concept or a pilot project, you roll it out within a limited sort of capacity. And then the whole idea of that is to learn, to get buy-in from your key stakeholders, and to sort of refine your processes and your capabilities, right? And your AI framework. And then finally, you want to scale that out across the enterprise, right? And again, there's a lot of lessons learned during phase 2, where you're doing the initial rollout. You want to incorporate all of that, build out your standards, et cetera, before you roll it out across the enterprise. So this is the phased maturity journey that we typically use with our clients, and it's been very successful. And then finally, before I turn it over to Navrina on operationalization of governance, here are some of the components of an AI governance program. You need people, you need skilled people. There's people from cross-functional organizations like IT, legal, ethics. You need to define your processes and procedures for doing this. You also need to have your policies and standards in place. There's certainly change management required, lots of training, lots of going out there and raising awareness about this area. And then finally, tools. In order for you to automate and in order for you to make this repeatable, you need a set of tools that are going to be going to enable this process. So I'm going to turn it over now to Navrina in terms of what it takes to operationalize AI governance and some learnings that she's had.
Thank you, Jay. I know we are almost over time, so I'll try and go through it so that we can leave some time for Q&A. And for folks on the call who are interested in getting a demo of our SaaS, you can go to credo.ai and request the demo. So just very high level, it's great to have folks like Jay and AlyData who are finding the nuggets from how companies are thinking about data and AI governance. And as you can imagine, AI governance is obviously an extension of data governance, which all of you here as chief data officers are already well versed with. So when we started on Credo, our goal was, is there a way that we can provide a SaaS product that can really help organizations who are starting on this journey of what does good look like? What are the standards and policies I should be adhering to? Can we make their life easy? And for us, the inspiration was really around how do humans build trust? So, we are building trust here through a set of interrogations. Hopefully during Q&A, there'll be more questions. We can address those questions. And based on the responses, you're building a trust index about Navrina and then indirectly about Credo AI in your heads. And is there a way that we can bring this trust methodology to how we are thinking about, how we are designing, how we are developing, deploying at scale these AI systems was a big question that we started to ask ourselves before building Credo AI. So we think about Credo AI, tool as a core set of capabilities that brings layers of trust. And the 3 layers of trust that we focus on are very aligned to the mental models as well as methodology that Jay shared previously. But our first layer of trust is really within the organization. As you can imagine, many companies have started to put in place accountability structures to think about who should be, vetting out the data, who should be thinking about the kind of, model methodologies we should be using in architecting a particular AI use case. What are the core risk areas, whether it is fairness, whether it is adversarial attacks, whether it is explainability that we should be tackling, and how do we ensure that this is done on an ongoing basis? So our first layer within our product is really focused on this governance workflow, which enables people and processes to come together to ensure that there's alignment around not only what does ethical AI with respect to the company look like, but also how are you providing the right oversight and accountability across the system. So as you can imagine, some of the traditional concepts of decision provenance within Credo AI, you're able to log all the decisions that go into building a system from the time you start designing to all the way to deployment at scale. The second layer of trust is really critical. This is where I would say a lot of technical knowledge comes in, but we've made sure that packaged together, we can serve our multi-stakeholders coming from whether they're from compliance, whether they're from audit, or whether they are from the technical spaces. So the trust with the AI solutions and ML models think about it as a set of ethical assessment modules that are built for your technical stakeholders so that they can be automatic gathering of evidence that these stakeholders are actually doing governance of these systems in an appropriate manner. So as an example, one of our customers is a largest global 2000 financial services organization. Obviously, previously they were doing governance where they would meet with the executive team once every 2 weeks. They were spending upwards of $50 million just in manual check of looking at all the input parameters that were being, going into building these models. And then they were assigning risk scores to these models. However, when it came time to test out these models, they didn't really have an independent perspective on, are these risk scoring models meeting the fairness requirements that were set within that enterprise? So what happens in our second layer of trust is using our ethical assessment modules baked for different requirements, you're able to do conformity assessment similar to how European Commission is talking about in their Artificial Intelligence Act. And lastly is the trust with the environment. And I alluded to this previously. These AI systems obviously are built on data, they're reasoning on data. And if the data and the historical information changes, guess what? These systems go crazy, as we've seen in the case of the pandemic, right? So how do you ensure when the environment in which these systems are deployed at scale is constantly changing? How are you not only pulling in the right policies and regulatory requirements, but also doing this continuous compliance check to make sure that a marketing model that you put out there or a facial recognition model that you put out there is still able to, within the context of what was defined as your enterprise guardrails and the risk okayed with your enterprise, it still meets those requirements. So what Credo AI does is able to pull in all those environmental parameters and ensure that your system is not going outside of those parameters. And if it does, there's a notification provided to the stakeholders to take action. And the action could be you decide to decommission a model, you decide to retrain a model, you decide to roll back to a previous version, whatever those actions are. But what we want to do with Credo AI is give you the insights to manage risk as well as to take proactive action. So just to close it out, and if we can go on to the next slide so we can take some questions, what we are seeing, and I'm not going to emphasize this again because I think all of you get it, but really this notion of unlocking more sales opportunities through good governance, which is becoming bedrock, to seeing and realizing the ROI on my AI investments, to much better risk management, across data as well as AI. And then increase confidence in your deployment at scale is some of the core benefits that we are seeing across the industry sectors that we've listed above. And to just close it all out in summary, I think the 4 key takeaways we want you to have from this session is that as you're starting on, or you already have been building extensive at-scale machine learning systems, take a pause and start thinking about what does good governance look like, because we are betting that good governance is going to be the bedrock of trustworthy economies as we move forward. What we really need to operationalize this, obviously, is the right accountability structures within your organization, but also a set of tools and right set of policies. And this is where, just an AlyData or a Credo AI won't make a difference. It's really coming together of the ecosystem partners. So we would love to hear from all of you, whether you're coming from policy backgrounds, whether you're coming from nonprofit background, AI research institutions. We would love to hear from you and make sure that this ecosystem around AI governance is happening appropriately. So I know we have only 5 minutes. I won't complete all the key takeaways, and let's take at least 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came in, Navrina, is what would you highlight as the main difference between AI governance and data governance? Do you want me to take that, or do you want to take that?
I'm sure both of us can take that, but I think about it, similar to if you're building a F1 race car, you will never do that without really understanding what is the quality, specification, sustainability of the fuel you're using. So I think about data governance, as a core aspect, but built on top of that is AI governance to ensure that these use cases that you're delivering on can be built in a robust manner. So AI governance really is the superset and holistic way that data governance can be put to life in life systems.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Navrina, I think, as you mentioned, data is the foundational aspect, right? Data is sort of the fuel for AI. So the way I look at data governance is having the right level of checks and balances to make sure the quality of the data is there, the privacy is being maintained, and that you have complete visibility into the metadata related to the data that you have. So again, I think data governance is foundational to AI governance. So companies need to look at those, as critical aspects. You can't do one without the other. The other question that came up is, in this topic, is AI being defined as advanced analytics or narrow AI in the governance framework?
So Jay, I think we are almost over time. Let's, one thing I would like to just close out with is feel free to email Jay and me, and we can take these questions outside of these sessions. Also, obviously check out credo.ai website, and I'm sure AlyData's website as well for more information. Yep. So I think we'll just pause here, and thank you so much for having us on this session today.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Derek, for moderating the session.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Navrina. Interesting stuff. I like the final slide on the 4 key takeaways. And I certainly applaud the idea of taking AI and data together rather than separating them out and say there's data governance and there's AI governance. Bringing them all together is such a compelling way of talking about this. And so I certainly applaud you guys for thinking about it that way. Without more ado then, thanks again for joining this session. All those of you who have sent in questions and that have been listening intently to this, we appreciate your attendance as well and your participation. Of course, this has been recorded, so long after this session ends, there will be people viewing this and coming up with ideas and thoughts and questions. So I'm sure both Navrina and Jay, you'll be getting people pinging you after this. So congratulations on a nice session.
Thank you very much, Derek, and look forward to the questions and addressing any specific areas that the audience has.